Hello and welcome to this episode 2 of the Amateur Hour podcast. My name is Adam Thomas. Today we're going to talk about some video game news. We're going to talk about some Star Wars and an article that I read about that. And I'm going to give my opinion on a recent anime controversy. I've seen the first few episodes. Get ready to listen to some assholes talk about random crap on the internet. So, first things first, an announcement. Soon I will be moving my operation to the new Eagle 1 space station that has recently finished construction. By moving my operations into space, I'll be more able to broadcast my message to the world, and its advanced communications equipment will allow me to receive and send signals through both time and space. So, Fallout 76. Really, I could just stop there. Oh, Fallout. Needless to say, I'm not a big fan of Fallout 76, which is a shame because, I admit I only played some of the original 2 Fallouts. I didn't have them as a kid, and I haven't gone back and played all the way through them, even though I've really been meaning to. My first beginning to end Fallout experience was Fallout 3, which I really liked, and I really liked Fallout New Vegas. But Fallout 76, this came to my attention when I was watching a video from Yang. Yeah, he was reporting that Bethesda finally, with Fallout 76, had some good news. They are returning items that were stolen in last year's hack. But there's bad news that goes along with that as well. The first bit of bad news is that Bethesda is going about it in a really strange way. What they're doing is that they're cloning your character at a point in the past, and then you have to log in as this clone character and work with Bethesda to initiate a secure transfer of the items that are on your cloned character to your actual character. This just seems odd. I don't have any idea why they had to do things this way. To me, it would seem they would just look back at the character, say, oh, these were the items that you had, and just drop a box in the world for you to open, and that way you could get all of your gear back. It just seems so strange that they would have to clone your character and create like this secondary type of account thing for you, and then go in and set up this transfer. It just seems really, really roundabout and putting undue pressure on customers that have already had a really bad, well, dozens probably at this point, but it's certainly at least one bad experience with the game having their items stolen because Bethesda can't secure this game. The other bad news is that new hacks are on the horizon for Fallout 76. The same person that created the 2 big hacks from last year, the before-mentioned steal people's stuff, and a hack which allowed you to spawn assets into the world, including assets that shouldn't be in Fallout 76. They're only in Fallout 4, but since Fallout 76 is just a rebuild of Fallout 4 or whatever, that this individual has created an all-new hack, and that it should be hitting Fallout 76 soon, and hopefully Bethesda's taking steps to stop it, because it's not only really powerful and allows you to do a lot of things, which most notably is something akin to the old map hacks, where you would be able to find anyone anywhere in the world, that your site is not limited to the natural site of the game, and that you can also set that items in your vicinity are automatically picked up, and you can even go in and adjust exactly what's picked up. This will completely destroy the PvP part of the game, especially the part of the game where you're going in and it's the Battle Royale part. With that, you would just be able to drop into the world, be able to see where everyone is, and just get geared up almost immediately, because you wouldn't need to stop and pick up your items. You would just be able to pick up items and get very geared up very quickly. And maybe even the worst part of all this is that this new hack is supposed to be even easier to use than the old hacks. I've never used any of these old hacks in Fallout 76. I can't say how hard or easy they are to use, but from my understanding, they're supposed to require at least somewhat technical knowledge to get up and running. This new hack, which this person is developing, is supposed to be like the easy bake oven of hacks. It's supposed to be very, very simple to use, and that could cause major, major problems for Bethesda if they don't get on top of this. Now, there is some blame to go around. People shouldn't be just running around trying to break games like this. It just ruins the experience for other people. But also, Bethesda has to get on top of this. You know, they need to do basically what Final Fantasy XIV did. Bethesda needs to just apologize, shut this old game down, and completely rebuild it. If they're going to continue on with an MMORPG, which honestly a Fallout 76 multiplayer online does sound really awesome. It just was done terribly. Bethesda just needs to shut it down and create the Fallout 76 that frankly we were all promised. And if they did that and it was a good game, I mean, good job. I'd go out and buy it. And I'd play it. But at this rate, I don't think that I want to buy another Bethesda product again. I mean, they did an awesome job with their old products. They were ahead of their time in many ways. But they have always been buggy messes. And yeah, you were able to kind of forgive this back in the old days because the rest of the game was so awesome. But Fallout 76 has just destroyed any good faith that they had. They have got to get ahead of these hacks. They have got to fix the game and deliver something even close to the experience that they promised with Fallout 76. Otherwise, it's not really going to matter what they do with the next Elder Scrolls or the next Fallout unless they hit those games out of the park. If they let Fallout 76 continue to fester without fixing it, or at the very least their next game being just amazing, then I'm just not going to bother with Bethesda anymore. And I can't suggest that anybody bother with it. I used to sing Bethesda's praises, but anymore I'm just like, yeah, just wait for the reviews to come out and hope. And if they come out bad, just don't buy their stuff anymore. Not until they either fix their problems or somebody else, CD Projekt Red, steps up to take their place. Now, on another note, I received an email from GameStop a while back. It was one of those typical marketing emails that I'm sure everyone gets a gazillion of, or at least it seems I get a gazillion of them. Now, I'm not such a hater on GameStop as a lot of people. Yeah, I've had good and bad experiences with them, and I do think that they're a dying company, not because they don't have a place in the world. I think they do. I just think that their upper leadership sucks. But I'll get into what my opinions on GameStop is in another episode, but I wanted to kind of go over this email because it contains some information about the PlayStation 5, which I thought was very interesting. I'll be the first to admit I'm not a super technical guy. I tend to leave all of the very technical details to people like Review Tech USA. He does a good job breaking stuff down. But there were several items listed, several selling features of the PlayStation 5 in this email, and I just kind of wanted to go through them one at a time. The first one is full 8K TV support. I'm not a huge fan of 4K or 8K or ultra definition. 1080p works fine for me. But with this, the thing that I have is with games, I get frustrated with 4K things in games. I really would rather have them successfully get games running at a nice, smooth 60 frames per second at 1080p than having games run and drop frames or drop to 30 or having inconsistent frame rates just to have higher resolution. Like, can we please get stuff running at 60 frames per second, 1080p, before we start worrying about 4K and even 8K? Hopefully that won't be an issue anymore. Hopefully the PlayStation 5 rolls around and even at 4K games just run smooth as butter. But if you give me an option of either having the game run at a higher resolution but a lower frame rate, or having it run at a lower resolution but a higher frame rate, I'm going to choose the higher frame rate every time. I'd rather have 60 frames per second, even at 720p, than I would having it, especially if it's an inconsistent frame rate, at a higher resolution. Just give me the nice, smooth frame rate, and that helps a lot. It says that it's going to have a bespoke 8-core AMD chipset. Honestly, I don't know that much about that chipset, so I can't comment on it. It's going to have 3D audio. That sounds good. I can tell you I love surround sound and 3D audio. Back in the day, in the early 2000s, I went out and bought a 5.1 Dolby Digital surround sound. After plugging that in and watching my first movie at home, I had no reason to ever go back to a movie theater. That's not to say I haven't been back to a movie theater, but most of what kept me going to the movie theater was the surround sound, that feeling of sound all around you, and the sound things flying over your head or buzzing around your head or moving from one side of the room to the other. I love that. 3D audio has kind of given that experience some without having to have receivers and speakers and wires running all over the place. So that's great. Built for purpose solid state drive storage. Now, this kind of scares me. I know everything is moving towards solid state drives, and that's great. It drops load time. I love solid state drives for that. They are super fast, they're small, they're great in a lot of ways, but it does worry me that when this PlayStation 5 launches, that we're going to have another problem with storage. It seems like that's been an issue with PlayStation ever since really storage was started. Yeah, there was a hard drive for the PS2, but when the PS3 came out, it launched with as small as a 20 gig hard drive. And the last PS3 that hit the market had a 500 gig hard drive. So, and the same thing kind of followed with the PlayStation 4. The PlayStation 4 launched with a 500 gig hard drive, and they had to up that to a terabyte, but even a terabyte drive on a PlayStation 4 isn't enough. And now we're going to be pushing with solid state drives. I am worried that the PlayStation 5 is going to launch with something like a 500 gig solid state drive or a 1 terabyte solid state drive, which is just not going to be enough storage, especially if you're downloading games. I mean, even if you're just installing the games and downloading the patches and you have the disk in the drive, I can't imagine a solid state drive with a PS5 now, if it has the run life of like a PlayStation 3 or even a PlayStation 4, they're going to have to do something about storage. I'm really worried that using exclusively solid state storage drives are just not going to cut it, and we're going to have problems in the future. I'll skip the next one for now because I want to come back to that. Ray tracing capabilities. I don't have ray tracing with being a console guy mostly. I do have a gaming PC, but it's not the best in the world. But being a console guy, I've never really messed with ray tracing that much. A friend of mine is a big PC gamer, and I have gone over and watched him play some stuff that had ray tracing, and it did look better. I mean, it does make things, especially for me, I noticed it in like reflections for some reason. You know, he pointed out lighting differences and stuff like that, and you know, once he pointed it out, I could see it. But I saw it first, like with reflections, looked a lot better, a lot more realistic. So that's great. I hope to really get in and see the difference with this new ray tracing that's going to be with the PlayStation 5. But what I wanted to get to was this list, the second one, which I'm going to close out this with, which is backwards compatibility with PS4 games / PSVR hardware. Now, I haven't been a fan of VR stuff. The first VR experience that I had was way back with a really old type of, I guess, VR helmet when I was in high school with MechWarrior 2. And that didn't work very well. I've been kind of holding off ever since VR got big again. I wanted to go somewhere and have a really good experience and kind of decide for myself whether VR is the way of the future or if it's going to be like 3D TV and just kind of die out. So I'm not real... I mean, it'd be great for people that like their VR stuff. This backwards compatibility with PS4 games, that's good, but I was getting excited, and I hope that it's not just PS4 games, that Sony does go that extra mile and give us backwards compatibility all the way to the PlayStation 1. I really don't see an excuse for that. Not having backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 4, yes, the cell processing of the PlayStation 3, that might have made that a nightmare to do, and it just wasn't available. But when the PlayStation 3 launched, it had backwards compatibility to the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. In fact, the launch PS3s had like little miniature PS2s built into them. And then later on, they did it kind of with emulation, and that didn't work so well. And then they dropped it altogether, and then we haven't had it with the PlayStation 4 really at all. It would be great if Sony went back and followed the one good thing that I like about the Xbox, is give us that full backwards compatibility. Not every single game, but give us the ability that with most games, if we drop them into our PlayStation 5, to be able to play them back to PlayStation 1. That would work well for people, because I don't know about you, but you know, I don't have my old PlayStation 1 anymore. It's, I guess technically I do. It's probably in my mom's attic or something like that. But, you know, having a PlayStation 2 hooked up, a PlayStation 3 hooked up, a PlayStation 4 hooked up, and now a PlayStation 5 hooked up, that's just getting overwhelming. And then on top of that, I have a PlayStation TV sitting up over there that basically just collects dust. But to be able to condense some of these systems down, not to mention finding parts and controllers and accessories for some of these things. Trying to find a replacement PlayStation 2 controller that actually works well is getting to be nearly impossible. To actually go out and find a PlayStation 2 controller that's not a cheap piece of junk that'll start sticking and causing problems after a year or so, to get a good feeling one that lasts, is getting difficult. With PlayStation 3 controllers having the batteries in them, so far I haven't had a problem with my PlayStation 3 controllers. They've lasted really well, but I'm really worried that in the coming years, all of these PlayStation 3 controller batteries are going to start going bad. And eventually, you just won't be able to find one that's wireless, because you just won't be able to. The ones that will be on the market will be secondhand or cheap pieces of crap, and the ones that actually have worked well, the batteries will start going bad, and eventually they'll just be wired controllers, if they'll function at all. I don't know if they're the type of controllers that once the batteries do go kaput, if the entire, even if you plug it up via USB to your PS3, if it just won't work at all. So that worries me. If you have the PlayStation 5 that's compatible all the way back, then that'll alleviate all that. That'll let people go out and buy PlayStation 5 controllers, plop their favorite PS2 games into the PlayStation 5, their favorite PlayStation 1 games, their favorite PlayStation 3 games, and be able to play it and not worry about it, and honestly save a headache of trying to keep all of these systems hooked up. I don't know about you, but I only have so many HDMI ports, and it gets to be a pain trying to go out and get HDMI hubs and selectors and trying to get all this stuff all hooked up at once, or getting the cables and stuff. Just make it backwards compatible. That would be great. And I think a good idea of how to do this. Have two versions of the PlayStation 5. You can call them whatever you want, but I'll call them, PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Deluxe or Plus or whatever. So your basic PlayStation 5, have it a cheaper price point, don't have the backwards compatibility, or only have the backwards compatibility to something simple, but make it the cheap version of the system, still fully capable, still with a good hard drive, still everything else. Just save a little money for people that are getting into PlayStation now that don't have a big PlayStation library, and let them come into it. And then have a more advanced version that has all the backwards compatibility, but have it charge more. Have it $100 more. I would be gladly give $100 to be able to take the old systems off and have everything all in one place. That would be awesome. So that's my advice. Have that lower price point so that you can more easily compete with the Xbox, and have that option for people that are like, why do I want backwards compatibility? I just want the PlayStation 5. I don't have all these old games. Have something for people like that, and then have a slightly more expensive version of it for people like me that have a big PlayStation 1 library, a pretty big PlayStation 2 library, some PlayStation 3 games, pretty good PlayStation 4 library. Give it to us all in one place so that we don't have to track down all of these old accessories, and it will just make everything great. And I think it would go over really well if you have it so that there are two versions of it, and make those two versions really distinct so that at a glance which is which. Some of the PlayStation 3s trying to find which one of the old grand piano version, to find which one of that is a 20 and an 80 and a 60 and which ones are compatible, which one. That was kind of a mess. Make it really apparent both in the look of the system and on the box which one is which. And I think it would you would continue your dominance. I think that would just help bury Microsoft, because that's the one thing that I look at Microsoft and look at an Xbox and go, you know what, if I buy an Xbox One X or whatever, then I'd be able to play Xbox games all the way back to OG Xbox. And that's kind of appealing to me, because I could go out and get some of these Xbox exclusives that I missed back in the day and have it all on one system. So that's appealing to me, and I think PlayStation 5 really needs that. Hopefully they condense that down, GameStop, to just this, because they thought that would be their selling point, and they don't care really that much about PlayStation 3, and they don't carry really PS1 or PS2 games at all in the stores anymore. So yeah, let's hope that's just their marketing, cutting out that and saying that the PlayStation 3 and back is irrelevant. I hope that's the case. I hope that we get a PlayStation 5 that'll let me throw in my PlayStation 1 discs and play them. If that's an option, I will totally go for it, and I will sell it as best I can. I'm a big PlayStation fan, and I hope they come through for me and make this faster, easier, better. Throw us old supporters of the PlayStation, us guys that supported you when you were first getting into the market and have never stopped supporting you since, throw us a bone and condense all of our old systems down to one. So, I know what you're thinking. This is normally where I talk about Star Trek or Star Trek Picard. And I admit, I have been talking about Star Trek a lot lately, with Picard coming out and being something that I'm actually interested in as far as Star Trek goes. It has been kind of on my forefront of my mind. But in this instance, I found an article that I felt I had to talk about it, and I haven't seen the latest episodes of Picard. I do intend to sit down and watch them at some point and give my brief opinion on them. But for now, I found this article. It was on Sci-Fi Wire. It's dated February 3rd, 2020, and it's by a Jacob Uhler. Now, the article starts by mentioning The Mandalorian, which is great, because The Mandalorian has really been the only thing in the Disney live action that I've really liked. I had a few little problems with it here and there, but for the most part, I did enjoy The Mandalorian, and I do look forward to it continuing. But what's the mention of the article? What if you have a chance to interview Kathleen Kennedy? You're going to immediately go to, when are you going to have a woman direct a Star Wars movie, a feature film? They point out that it's been an, quote, all-white guy lineup. So, I'm all for diversity. I love having diversity. I think that diversity should be pushed some in Star Wars, but not at the cost of the story and the quality of the product. Don't choose your director based on their race or gender or sexual orientation or whatever. Base the director, and in fact all talent, on who does the best job. I don't care who directs Star Wars, as long as they make a good Star Wars movie, as long as they make a good Star Wars TV show or cartoon or action figure. I don't care. The biggest problem that I've run into with sci-fi recently, with both Star Wars, Star Trek, I'm not a big Doctor Who fan. My brother is big into it, and from what I understand from him and Doomcock, that they've really been just pushing this diversity message. Diversity is great, but it cannot come at the expense of your product. Choose your story. I think the biggest problem with all this is that the writers and leaders of these franchises are more concerned with their social message than with the story. Okay, it's fine and in some ways really good to have a social message buried in a story. Star Trek did that well for years. Within the story, there would be a positive social message or a critique of the social fabric at the time. But that was key. The message was part of the story. What's been going on with Star Trek, Star Wars, and other franchises is that the message has supplanted the story. The story doesn't make much sense. The message is the only thing that matters. I think the biggest problem is that the people running these franchises don't view them as a universe with a history and internal workings and things that make sense. They just view them as a platform to spread their social message. The story is secondary, the characters are secondary. Frankly, it seems like making money to them is secondary. The only thing that matters is their message. It said a lot when Kathleen Kennedy got up and was upset that people had criticisms of her Star Wars films, calling the fans who had been fans of Star Wars for decades in some instances, who had kept Star Wars alive when there were no TV shows, no movies, maybe some comic books and novels, but kept the franchise alive in its dark time, to insult them and call them all kinds of isms and phobes and all this other stuff. When people have criticisms of your characters, take that into account. Take those criticisms into account. It's not necessarily always the best, but to sit there and turn and insult these people that have such passion for the franchise that you have created, that they actually took their time to analyze it, feel it out, and come up with their opinion. It would have been so much simpler for them just not to say anything, to just not give you their money. And that's what, in a way, what we're starting to see now. Younger people, at least in my experience, care less and less about Star Wars, which is amazing to me. Star Wars was the franchise for pretty much all of my life. I couldn't, until this recent batch of Disney Star Wars films, it was inconceivable to me to find Star Wars toys on clearance, let alone in closeout stores, in last chance bins. They're at the point now, I think, that they're just straight up throwing some of them away. I don't know that for certain, but I've seen them at closeout stores. I had never seen Star Wars merchandise at all at closeout stores up until Disney took over and Kathleen Kennedy took over. To take these franchises and do what they've done to them, I'm sorry, I just don't think that Kathleen Kennedy has a future at Lucasfilm. Or at least, if she does, I don't have a future with Lucasfilm. To me, I was a big lover of the expanded universe. I loved Star Wars, and as I grew up and I wanted more of it, and frankly there wasn't any more of it, I started to discover the expanded universe. And I'm not going to say that the expanded universe was perfect. I'll say that I have never read a terrible Star Wars novel that was from the expanded universe. There were certainly some that were awesome. There were certainly some, I can think of two, that were really not very good. But I haven't read one that was just awful, that I couldn't make it through and I just didn't want to have anything to do with. Even the two that I really, really don't like and don't particularly like reading, I managed to read them all, and I actually have gone back and reread them again. So even the worst of the Legends books did not affect me in the way that the new Star Wars, Disney Star Wars movies have. And that is a shame. And I think it all comes down to that the people back then were writing in the interest of Star Wars. Did they necessarily do a good job? Yeah, some of them did, some of them didn't. But they were always writing for Star Wars. They wanted to write the story. The people that are in charge now and are writing now have an agenda. They have a message to bring. And that message is more important than the story. I'm part of the fandom menace in a way. I'm not as extreme about it as perhaps our future ruler of Earth, Doomcock, but I do feel that these stories are important and they are being destroyed. And frankly, when the new Star Wars movie came out, I can remember when the prequels came out, and I was excited for them. Even when they were as lackluster as they were, I was still excited each time that the Star Wars prequels came out. I was somewhat excited when The Force Awakens came out. But since then, I just don't care anymore. When the new movie came out, when Rise of Skywalker came out, I didn't care. I was borderline sad that it came out. And that's what these people have done to Star Wars. They have taken something that I used to love and have made it to the point where I, at best, just don't care anymore. So, anime controversy. For anybody that's not aware, because it's been kind of in the circle lately, a show called Interspecies Review has been taken off Funimation streaming, and according to comicbook.com, has now also been removed from Amazon Prime. Funimation has been very vague on their statements, basically saying that it does not meet our standards. According to the before-mentioned comicbook.com article, quote, "So far, Anime Lab did confirm it will continue airing the show in Australia and New Zealand, but future episodes will be adjusted for content." The same story goes on to confirm that the show will continue to air in France, but their Nordic branch did pull the show. So that leaves the question, why? Why was the show pulled? Does not meet our standards is very vague, especially for Funimation, who has such shows as like High School DxD. So, curiosity got the better of me. I tracked down and watched the first 3 episodes of Interspecies Reviewers. And as I watched episode 1, there were a lot of dirty jokes, some nudity, and I just couldn't figure out why the show had been pulled. Now, I didn't break out a stopwatch or anything, but looking at the amount of nudity and fan service that was in the show, it did not seem out of proportion compared to other fan service shows such as High School DxD, UFO Ultramarine Valkyrie, and other similar fan servicey shows that have nudity in them. So when I finished episode 1, my working theory onto why the show was canceled was that it was completely based around the sexual jokes. Other shows, as dirty as they may be, at least try to have a plot going on that the fan service, nudity, dirty jokes are then worked into. This show does away with any other pretense. Yes, it's set in a fantasy setting, but there is no real adventuring, there's no saving the world, no evil dictator to overthrow, no demon lord. The show is completely based around the dirty jokes, brothels, and the sexual situations that the characters find themselves in. That was my working theory upon completing episode 1. Then I reviewed episode 2, had pretty much the same feelings through most of episode 2. Towards the end was saying, okay, yeah, they are kind of pushing the line here, but I was still like, oh, well, this is still just a dirty fan service show. Then I saw episode 3. Episode 3, in my opinion, did cross a line, and I think that Funimation, there were ways that they could have handled this, but I can see why they pulled it now, and I don't think it was the wrong decision. I think 90% of the problem and a lot of the controversy that has sprung up around this show was not the fact that it was pulled. It was the fact that Funimation handled it so badly. Now, one charge that's been made is that Funimation knew what they were getting into when they licensed this show and made the announcement that it was going to be dubbed and released. That's not exactly fair. Now, I haven't read the manga, but according to some other people that have, it does not get anywhere near as graphic as the show does. On the other hand, this show is still airing in Japan. This is doing a simul dub. So, who knows when these contracts were signed? Funimation could have received the manga, perhaps exactly how this went down when contracts were exchanged. In that, I do think that Funimation could have handled this situation a whole lot better than what they did. Just basically saying that it doesn't meet our standards, well, Funimation has carried some pretty raunchy shows in the past. Again, I don't think they've carried anything quite to this level. The real issue is with the statement that they released. I can understand them kind of scrambling after seeing what was happening in the show and trying to come up with a decision and implement that decision as quickly as possible. But simply stating that it does not meet our standards and then mum is the word after that was a terrible decision. They could have come out and easily said, we apologize to the fans of this show, but after further review, we believe that the content within this show exceeds our vision for what our streaming service is going to offer, and then told fans what to expect. Are they going to continue to dub the show, which I believe that's already been resolved that they're not, but they should have taken the time to inform the fans of this show what the future of the show was going to be. If they weren't going to stream it, is a Blu-ray or DVD release coming that's just subtitled? Are they releasing the show back out so that other carriers, other anime companies can then go in and pick it up if they want? Is it going to have to sit? I think a big part of the problem is that no one knows what's going on. And I understand if they were pressed for time and this was sort of dropped in their lap, people really would have been happy with a, stay tuned in the coming days for more information on how this show's release is going to be handled. Most of the controversy on this show could have totally been avoided, and I think people would have been like, yeah, that sucks, but at least we know what's going on. Hopefully, Funimation makes that decision and lets their fans know. Because this show does have its fans. Clearly, with my anime list having the issues that it is, with the show being voted up to number 2, I believe, at one point, there are fans of this show that are willing to go out and speak for it. Now, what were my thoughts of the show itself? Again, only seeing episode 1, 2, and 3, I think that it's a mixed bag. When I watched episode 1, I thought it, for the most part, it was pretty funny. Yes, it was dirty jokes from beginning to end. Yes, the nudity was in there. Yes, it was totally a fan service show. But I thought that the show had a future. By episode 3, I thought that the show was in a strange middle ground. That the show should have made a decision one way or the other what it was going to be. If the show was just a dirty comedy with some fan service and some nudity in it, I think that I would have enjoyed that show. When they are funny, and they're not always funny, but when they're funny, they are hilarious, at least to me. I thought some of the jokes were just, yes, they were dirty jokes, yes, they were very lowbrow, but a lot of them I thought were very, very funny. When the show was trying to be funny, and for me, failing to be funny, it did fail to be funny. There were things in the show that I thought that were meant to be jokes, that the writers of the show thought were hilarious, that just fell flat to me. As far as going the other way, it's a shame because the show goes almost all the way into pornography. It does not quite cross that line. Honestly, it reminds me of some of the soft-core skin flicks back on the Cinemax days, but it didn't go all the way to be that kind of show, if you know what I mean, to serve that purpose. So it's really one of those shows that I don't understand who the audience of this show is. If it's just supposed to be a raunchy comedy, I think they push the limit, the boundary there a little too far into the graphic, a little too far into the content for it to be acceptable as just a fan service comedy. At the same time, if they were going to be the other, then they didn't go far enough. The scenes weren't graphic enough and were too much reliant on comedy to suit that purpose. So, to me, this seems to be a show in search of an audience rather than a show targeting an audience. This seems to be a strange middle ground, more based on, hey guys, let's see how far we can push this, let's see what we can get away with, as opposed to, this is the story we want to tell, or the purpose we want to serve. If it were up to me, I would drop the fan service and nudity down to a more acceptable level. I would put at least somewhat of a pretense of another plot in there, and I would have it as another fan servicey with some nudity, dirty joke show, more focused as they are on dirty jokes than being some kind of half serious fantasy with a bunch of fan service in it. Go ahead and let it be about the fan service and the dirty jokes, but don't push it to the level that you're getting into uncomfortable territory. Let it be a show that is either one or the other. So coming up on next episode, I found an interesting article and an interview with the director of Smash Brothers and his opinions on Fire Emblem characters in Smash Brothers. It also had some information about the upcoming Fighter Pass for the Season 2 of the next 6 downloadable fighters. I'm also going to be talking about some video games I've been playing and giving my quick opinion on those. I'll be seeing you guys on the next episode. Thanks again, guys.